start. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you happen to be around the world. This is a very special edition of the Groovy podcast. My name is Ken Kousen. I'm podcasting from Marlborough, Connecticut, and I am joined by our good friend...
Me, Peter Ledbrook, podcasting from normally London, but actually I'm in the sticks in southeast England. I'm staying with my mum at the moment for Christmas.
Wonderful. For those, I mean, it's hard to believe that there are many people out there who don't know you, okay? But we might as well just bring them up to speed a little bit. Peter was the person who revived the Groovy podcast after it had transitioned from being the Grails podcast years ago. Peter is also the co-author of, do you want to tell him about the Manning book? I mean, how's it?
I don't know. I'm wondering whether this is one of those topics that I don't want to talk about, but too many bad memories. Yeah, no, Grails in Action. Because if I bring up Grails in Action, then somebody may ask, hey, what about third edition? That is not going to happen, seriously. But yes, many moons ago, did co-author Grails in Action with Glenn Smith. Oh, of course, it was did the Grails podcast way back when.
That's right. Yeah, the Grails podcast was Glenn and Sven. You know, Sven Higas and Glenn Smith.
Yeah. Oh, so long ago. Wow.
As it's turning out to be, yeah.
Feeling my age now.
We should mention, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
And then I was just going to say, and then I disappeared off the planet for a year or so.
Well, you also did the command line tool for creating a new project. Oh,
don't bring that up.
Really?
Yeah, Lazy Bones.
Yeah.
It's a pet project that I would love to get back to at some stage, but it's just for various reasons, which we may or may not get into. It's a hibernating project.
Well, but I figure we bring it up anyway. It's still available under SDK Man, and somebody may want to maintain it. And that's also, by the way, a quick minor segue. That's how I always used to create Rat Pack projects. And by golly, Rat Pack just released a new version, right? Did you see that?
No. I have not kept up to date with pretty much anything in the technical world.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about it too. Oops, I tried to Google Rat Pack and I got, Sinatra and all that, I got the Rat Pack. Here's ratpack.io. Yeah, I saw a tweet about this. I think it might have been yesterday, saying that they had a brand new release, Rat Pack 1.6.0, at exactly 2018, 12/20. So that, that's as current as you can get, today being the 21st. The winter solstice, as it were. How's the weather where you are, by the way?
It's actually sunny, which is kind of unusual.
Yeah,
and we're not too cold.
We're being drenched by rain. I mean, we're having a massive downpour today. I'm hoping I don't lose power or anything like that. It's not cold. I mean, it's the shortest day of the year, apparently, right?
Yeah.
Nevertheless, by the way, just for your information, just the release notes on Rat Pack, just in time to ring in 2019, Rat Pack 1.6.0 is not available. This release adds integration with additional reactive programming libraries and many improvements. Let's see, what did they change? Netty's been upgraded. Jackson, reactive streams 1.0.2. Caffeine, I don't know that one. Snake YAML handlebars and Rat Pack reactor modules for working with Project Reactor. That's a good thing. That's the one that Spring uses, Project Reactor, inside there, and many others. Boy, I'm glad I get the chance to say something about it. I haven't seen much going on with that project at all.
Oh, okay. It's good to hear. And I take it reactive is still a thing.
Yeah. By the way, for those people who are listening to us on audio rather than watching the YouTube video, I should mention Peter's camera's got some sort of lag issue going on, so we're only seeing him periodically. So if you're just listening to the audio, you miss all that, but the audio seems to be fine so far, right?
Touch wood, fingers crossed. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? It's the internet. There'll be lag waves sweeping through, and we don't do a lot of post-processing here. It's kind of a point of pride,
Yeah.
I did wear my appropriate shirt, as you can see, potentially. I'm feeling vaguely threatened and dangerous right now. You know.
I'm not going to ask from what, because
Well, just life in general. I mean, both of our countries are kind of melting down at the moment. So
yes, yeah. So I was going to say this, that I haven't kept up with technical things at all, but I've been keeping well up to date with American politics.
it's like I sometimes compare my Twitter feed to an IV drip with a certain amount of poison in it. And it's just you try to filter out as much of the poison as possible. But because the people I follow are good people, it tends to come in anyway, you know, and it's a question of how much you can take on a daily basis, I think. No, for those who can't see, I'm just wearing a Star Trek red shirt. So, you know, if something bad happens, I'll know why, I suppose, you know.
So it doesn't have a beam me up then.
Yes, well, I'd be okay with that. Yeah, sure. I mean, anything to avoid the airlines, I suppose. So what have you been doing? I mean, you took a break. It's been a couple of years now, right?
Yeah, it feels like a very long time. Yeah. Well, yeah. So I've been pretty quiet for, I think, a long time, maybe closer to 2.5 to 3 years. And then officially took a year off work and tried to unplug and resolve this problem I have, which is akin to chronic fatigue syndrome. But I don't. I say akin to rather than actually that's it. Partly because it's not really a diagnosis of anything. It's a diagnosis of your symptoms. It's like, you're tired all the time. That's CFS. Anyway, so took a year off. That didn't really help. And the reason I actually took that year off was back when I came back from traveling. So that was pretty much a year off away from computers and everything like that. And I came back from that feeling really fresh and able to concentrate and very productive and completely different. I felt like a completely different person. So I knew what it could be like. So I thought, hey, maybe if I take a year off, then I can get back to that. Unfortunately, it clearly wasn't just about taking a year off. So now I'm just sort of getting by, and I've been very grateful to GraderLink for allowing me to work very reduced capacity. They've been very understanding on that front. So it means I can continue to work, but I don't do an awful lot, just struggle with it. And yeah, that's been since last February, I think.
Well, I knew you were doing some work on the user manual for the upgrade to Gradle 5. Were you doing anything on the technical parts of Gradle or mostly just writing for them?
So yeah, I'm pretty much technical writing side now. It's partially, I'm not sure I'll ever go back to a significant amount of software development because I know it's problematic for me. It makes things worse fairly quickly. So yeah, I tend to avoid that. But I'm actually pretty happy writing when I have time. I think that the book, you know, when struggling to get a few hours of work in a day, think back when I was trying to do a full-time job and fit in writing, it was like, no wonder I was having a bit of a hard time with that. So yeah, and after a while, practice helps. And it's something that I'm kind of a passion I'm very keen on. It's just to help people use these things, and like in this particular case, Gradle. But I feel that it's an area where the tech industry could do much better. Has done a lot better in like user interface design, for example. But in terms of like teaching and documentation, and it always feels a little bit like a secondary thing, especially if you've got an open source project. You know, developers almost universally hate writing. And we want to spend as little time as possible on it. And so it's a case of, hey, look, the feature's documented. That's it. That's good enough, isn't it? It's like, well, no, not really.
Are you you writing using, say, ASCII doc or Markdown or something like that?
God, thank God for that. So one of the members of the Gradle Link team actually invested quite a lot of times changing it from the tool chain from DocBook to ASCII Doctor. So anyone who's done any writing and they've done DocBook, it's it's better than Word, but not really saying too much. ASCII Doctor is so much nicer. So a big thanks to is it Dan Allen? It's Dan Allen, isn't it? Not Dave. Dan Allen.
Right. Dan Allen, right.
The guy behind ASCII Doctor. I mean, he's made many of our lives a lot better for having created that thing.
I know, I'm a fan. Yeah, I definitely am very much happier writing in ASCII doc than any other text-based format I've seen. Back when you did the Gradle in Action book, I presume Manning was still using Word files at the time. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, my Making Java Groovy book was in Word also, and I'm just, well, the nightmares have ended, but it took a while, you know. I mean, so O'Reilly uses ASCII doc. I've just recently discovered, somewhat to my horror, that pragmatic programmers, the prags, they're basically on either their own flavor of DocBook that they call Prag Markup Language, PML, or you can embed in there Markdown. So somebody's got to bring them into the 21st century, but not at the moment. And then I talked to somebody at Manning recently. You may remember Michael Stevens.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. And he claims that they're now on ASCII doc, you know, and using a Git repository and everything. But I don't know personally. I haven't seen it. You know, did they ever approach you about doing another edition of Grails in Action, or is that?
No, they didn't. I don't know. That may possibly have been because there was a very strong no. There's no chance I'm ever going to do the third edition, or for other reasons. But I do remember that there was one author that I heard about who said they were going to use ASCII Doctor. So
yeah. Well, I do. They've moved to try to accommodate that. I know that.
Yeah.
Do you hear anything from Glenn Smith these days? It's been a while.
No, I've, as I said, I've been sort of unplugged from the world. So I don't touch Twitter very rarely. Touch Facebook or anything really. So yeah.
Well, it occurs to me I missed an opportunity. I should have. When I contacted you, I should have contacted him as well to see if I could get him to drop by. Of course, the 12-hour time zone difference would probably put a damper in that, but nevertheless,
it's a long one. He may need more notice as well.
Yeah,
sure. He has a family, so he'll be preparing, I assume, for Christmas, or what passes for Christmas in Australia, which is barbecue.
I'm going to walk away from that whole discussion. Who knows? I have several. I mean, of course, you dealt with at Gradle. There's several members of the Gradle team that are Aussies. So
yeah.
When I worked a little bit on
a couple of them, yeah. So I think it's grand. They get it Christmas in summer, and they can enjoy it outdoors.
Yeah, I would love to go down there these days. That would be very nice. Although they're having their own chaos too, from what I gather, in the government, I mean, and everything.
Yeah. China. It's yeah.
Well,
my own country's politics is enough, and
yeah,
as a side order of U.S. politics, everything else is.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have so much chaos on our newspapers that Brexit barely makes it into our news at all. But again, I follow a lot of Europeans, so I hear about the chaos that way. But it's just whatever's reflected in as we go along. Yeah, I mean, the world is boiling, and therefore people getting angry, and all these things happen. But all right, leaving that aside. So if you're not doing anything technical, just out of curiosity, though, how did you get involved in technical stuff? What was your background? Where were you? Where did you come from? What got you involved in Groovy and things and all of that?
Well, I mean, the technical background when I get started was really at, well, I was going to say at school, but when I was of school age. But it was a hobbyist programmer way back when, on the Amiga, if anyone remembers that. I had a ZX81, which was a very UK oriented sort of home computer. I don't know whether it made it outside of the UK particularly.
I've heard of it, but yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of fun. I missed the days of loading things from tape, and you could hear whether it was loading correctly or not by the noise it was making. And it's like, so you didn't have to get to the end. It's like, oh, that's not working. Stop, rewind, play again. You see, these are the kinds of things people get nostalgic about. It's like, don't miss it, but get a bit nostalgic about it.
Well, the phone coupling sound too when you logged on to what constituted online those days.
Oh, yeah. I actually didn't use modems much, barely at all. And then when I got online, I was lucky enough to be on a ADSL trial. So I went straight from university, which had, of course, its super fast internet connections, to my home in London, which suddenly had ADSL before most other people. So that was kind of cool. So I had a little bit of experience with the old style modems, but not an awful lot.
So what were you coding in those days?
Well, I started with C, which is kind of an odd one for people to really start with. And yeah, you know, people, I eventually worked out what pointers were, for example, but it took a while. And yeah, there was, back then the Amiga had started to introduce, because it was well known for its graphics side of things and its graphics libraries. And actually, the graphics libraries I remember being quite good. But they introduced this thing called BOOTC, which is like basic object-oriented programming, something. And that I didn't really understand. And now, having done a lot of object-oriented programming, I could have missed it. But no, so yeah, it started with C, and I think that's you're not so close to the hardware that you get lost in the trees, but you're close enough that you can sort of have a better understanding how computers work.
Sure.
And then, I mean, university had nothing to do with computers. That was chemical engineering. But I was doing some of the more computational stuff, numerical computation, modeling of complex processes. That's when I got my first experience with Unix. That's back when I thought, who the hell designed this flipping operating system? Terrible. How do I list a directory? I don't know. So at some point, I quickly changed opinion on that and became more of a Unix than a Windows person. But yeah, back then, how our tastes change.
Right.
So, and then I went into C++ for my first job. So I actually went from chemical engineering into programming. And there is a connection based on the type of company it was. And then it was during that job that I got introduced to Java, and then it gradually progressed. Groovy and Grails was quite a bit later. That was back in 2006. That was actually after my travels. So I was very energetic and very focused and very productive at that time. But also wanted to try to create a web app fairly quickly. And all the Java stuff sucked badly at that stage. I mean, hey, if you want to invest several days or weeks of your life just to get a basic page up and running, yeah, fine. But I found Grails for what I think based on Rails. Ruby on Rails was in Dr. Dobbs at the time and something else. And I thought, I wonder if there's something for Java. So yeah, came across Grails and pretty much fell in love with it. And it's like, this is so easy. And I really enjoyed the scaffolding, for example, just because I could get to see how it worked, and then I could just change it. And then I found that a very quick way of learning how to use it. and then I went to work for G21, and that sort of started the Groovy and Grails and working in the open source world journey.
You were an employee of G21.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
wow. I knew there were about a dozen. I didn't know you were one of those.
A dozen?
Were there? Oh, is that too
There
high?
are 4 or 5.
Oh, is that all it was? It was 4 or 5.
Uh,
And Graham, I knew.
5 or maybe 6. I mean, there were the 3 founders. Yeah, Guillaume, Graham, and I can't remember his name now. It's been so long. And he was the chief exec. So Alex Catchman.
Oh, right, of course, Alex. Yeah.
So there were 3, and then I joined, and I think Jeff joined. I'm not sure if Bert joined then or once Spring Source had bought out G21.
Well, Jeff Brown, I know, was one of the founders, as I recall, and along with Graham Roche and Guillaume Laforge. And I thought there was another couple people, but I don't remember the details anymore. And you were actually there. Yeah. Then, of course, as our long-term listeners know, G21 was bought by Spring Source, which was bought by VMware, which was bought by EMC, and then by Dell and all that. And of course, then VMware spun off Pivotal. And according to Jeff Brown, his job didn't change that much. His email address changed 4 times, something like that.
Yeah.
So how
crazy.
long?
Well, I was only there and up to and including VMware, pretty much just before Pivotal was spun off. I had no idea that was happening anyway. So
that's when you went on your own after that, or did you go somewhere?
Yeah. And that was just another instance of I haven't stayed in jobs for terribly long, and a big reason is I just get frustrated at feeling so unproductive, and then I've eventually worked out that it was this condition I have, but back then it's just feeling like I have to step away to re-energize or whatever. It never worked terribly well, but yeah, I was always amazed that people were happy with my work output, because I was not. I was incredibly frustrated with how little I felt that I was able to do. But also that was a challenging time, because I was the Groovy and Grails evangelist at the time, by myself, and there were just so many competing demands, and I just felt like I could never satisfy any of them. So that was frustrating as well.
I think one of the first things I saw from you, where I first encountered you, at least in print, was your series of blog posts about Gorm that you did back for, that must have been VMware, but it might have been Spring Source even before that.
Yeah.
It was tips and tricks, but I forget what it was actually called, but it was, you were showing traps that you could fall into in Gorm. It was like a 4-part series of blog posts on that.
Yeah, I think they were fairly popular as well.
Yeah, and didn't they eventually get wrapped into, well, one of the Gorm chapters on Grails in Action, I imagine?
Well, the stuff that we learned definitely went into the book for sure, and I'm sure some of it got wrapped into the user guide at some point as well.
So interesting little path. I mean, chemical engineering, I wouldn't have guessed that one. Yeah, I was similar. I was in mechanical engineering and math, and so my programming language of choice back in those days, not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice, was Fortran at the time. Yeah, all the numerical libraries were written in Fortran. I mean, there was really no other option. And when you had to do, I was working on aerodynamic stuff, and all the simulations were in Fortran. Nowadays, of course, all those numerical things have been ported over to Python. you know, so that the machine learning people and the statistics people are all working in Python these days. I never would have guessed Python would take off like that, or I would have studied that back then.
Yeah, well, back when I was, so my first job was fascinating because it was, I just did the C++ side, but yeah, the core of the software was actually a combination of Fortran and Modular 2.
Oh, wow. Oh, my.
It's like, as far as I knew, no one was using Modular 2, but yeah, we had this stuff. So had the three different languages for different things. And it's just like, you really don't want to maintain that stuff. I was really happy to learn that that company, because I'm still good friends with a few of the people that still work there. And yeah, there are some people still working there like 10, 15 years later. So what was I saying?
Modular 2 and working on the...
Oh no, I was really glad that they had switched to Gradle for their build, but they're only using it for their Java side. They're not using it for native yet. So it's like, they'll see the light. They'll see the light eventually. When, although to be fair, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that people jump into Gradle for native just yet, because I gather that they are working on some new plugins and they need to move away from the old software model that they've tried. So, but you know, if you need to do dual native plus Java, I think Gradle is going to be a sweet spot for Gradle for sure, because yeah, having two different build systems for them was not great. But yeah, speaking of Python, one of my later jobs, actually both companies were spun out from university, so that probably explains a little bit about the technology choices and the Unix focus and yeah, the languages used. But so I worked for a company that used image processing technology to try to infer information out of images. And that's when I had a first play with Python, because you had the core computational stuff in C++. I think with Fortran libraries, but you can link them together. And they'd created Python bindings. So I thought, hey, yeah, let's try that. And that's when I learned how slow dynamic languages can be. Because images are basically these big arrays, huge, millions of elements representing the image. And so I was using Python to iterate over them to do stuff. And I was like, why is this taking so long? And that was my first introduction to know your tool, know what it's good for, and where it's really, really bad.
Yeah, I tried to, my exposure to the good old JNI, Java Native Interface, back working with Java and C together. In the late 90s, I actually had a project where, and I still can't believe I went through this. I actually put a Java Swing user interface on top of a Fortran program because I was in a group that did AI-like stuff that you would call AI now, but they were analyzing statistical data from elevators. So this was I was part of a division of United Technologies, and they owned Otis Elevators, so that this group was analyzing elevator data, trying to predict failures, you know, our mean time to failures, and being able to anticipate when to send maintenance people out there. Well, of course, all the statistical routines were in Fortran, and they were eventually going to transition to MATLAB, of course, at the time. I knew Java. I said I'd put a UI on it, and of course I put the UI on it in Swing, and then I had to go from Java to C and C to Fortran, and it's basically like taking a beam and putting a notch in it and saying, I want you to break right here. You know, it's the one time in my career when I actually used the phrase, well, it worked on my machine, and that's all. I never got it to work anywhere else.
Oh God, yeah. Sorry, you just reminded me of another project I worked on, and that was a web app. But it was a web app with it was using Java Web Start.
Oh wow, yeah,
which was that alternative to applets. So you have this Swing interface UI, and there was just one customer where it just wouldn't work. The app would not run, and just couldn't. I never ever managed to solve that, to much to my chagrin and embarrassment and various other things. And I just like, what? Don't understand. Yeah, that was really complicated. But yeah, my first job, we actually produced a Swing base. That's why I got into Java. We were producing a Swing-based user interface for the native stuff. Although I think we just ran it as an executable, none of this JNI stuff. Although we did get into Callba, if you remember that.
Oh my God. Well, everybody, I always say everybody has one project in their career that was so horrible, it just about drove them out of the field entirely. Mine was a Corba project in C++. We had 4 project managers who would turn every 20-minute, let's just catch up meeting into a 4-hour shouting match. And it was all about Corba. And it's like, oh my goodness. I was so glad when Java 11 actually dropped the Corba module for real. You know, I was like, oh, thank goodness. I mean, that eventually became as I recall, the EJB 1.0 bindings in Java came from the Corba module, believe it or not.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. There was a brief period of time when I was entertaining the possibility of putting in Fortran bindings for Corba. Boy, I can't imagine what a disaster my career would have been if I'd gone that. Yeah. So you actually worked with Corba there for a while, huh?
Yes, yes, and it was a struggle. Although to be fair, it was definitely easier from Java than it was from C++. But
by the way, that led me to my favorite typo on a slide once I saw. Is somebody was writing out the acronym Corba, and they wrote Common Object Request Broken Architecture. And I just fell out of my chair.
Oh, how so accurate.
Yeah, it was supposed to be, for those who are not aware, which is, God bless you, you know, was a Common Object Request Broker Architecture, and they wrote broken, and I loved it. I just thought it was great.
I'm impressed that you remember what the acronym stands for.
Oh, well, it's mostly because of that gag, you know, which, by the way, is how I always keep writing. You know, whenever I have something to write and I look at this and I go, man, it's going to be so much work. And if I ever have a joke to tell, you know, if I have a story with a gag in it, well, then I'll write and write and write just to tell the gag. And then the editor later could say, let's take out the gag. And I'll be like, okay. But I mean, then at least I have all those pages left. You know?
Interesting way of doing it. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, it's a weird motivation.
Hey, whatever works. I mean, it's
well. You mentioned, of course, stuff with to bring the reason we're doing this podcast too is I was somewhat, I suppose, shamed into it, or got my competitive instincts running, because Sergio Delamo, okay, our good friend Sergio, who's behind the Groovy Calamari, did a couple of Groovy Calamari podcasts. Are you aware that he's got a podcast now?
Yes. I know that because I saw a tweet from you, and that was one of the few that I decided to follow.
Oh, well, I'm honored. But at any rate, so I retweeted his, of course, and he said that they had done 2 podcasts. They'd done twice as many podcasts as we had this month, which meant 2 versus 1. And of course, that meant I was trying to contact Baruch and say, well, we got to do 3 of them today, you know, just to get ahead. And of course, Baruch wasn't going to go for that. He's, you know, not quite so immature. So instead, I thought, oh, I know, I'll contact Peter and we'll just have a conversation. And now at least I can say to Sergio, hey, you know, we did the same thing you did this month.
Yeah, we broke even.
And I got a guest and everything, you know, a really good one. So there you go. You noticed his latest Groovy Calamari, he has this wild speculation about what's going to happen with Gradle. Now, are you, how closely are you connected with them these days? Well, how would you describe it?
So I work closely with them. I'm effectively a freelancer for them. So, but yeah, I'm in contact with them on a regular basis, and I have sort of a view of what's happening internally.
I suppose I have, in the interest of full disclosure, I was a freelancer for them for a while. I worked on the getting started guides for a bit, but that's kind of scaled down. Now what I do is I teach the intro class online. Okay, so that's my only remaining connection really with them formally. So I don't really know what's going on internally, but I don't know that Sergio does either, and he's making the speculations about what's going to happen with Gradle. Will they get acquired? Are they going to? I mean, I have no idea about any of that. Do you?
No, no. I mean, it is, as far as I'm aware, it's just that speculation. So
Yeah. My sense
I
was,
don't know what's going
yeah.
on there. I think just proper politicians answer. Just going to focus on producing the best possible content for Gradle and leave it at that. But
Well,
I do hope. Speaking of that, I don't want to just pass that off as
sure.
politics speak. Really hoping that people do like the changes to the user manual. Like, we're going to get in a new Maven, an updated Maven migration guide into 5.1 doc. So I hope that helps people. You know, there was the actually way back when added stuff on incremental build that wasn't very covered. So
Right.
well covered. So yeah, I'm hoping that gradually a lot of these changes are going to percolate through, and people are going to actually see Gradle in a new light and get a better understanding of it. Because, you know, if you browse Stack Overflow and Google Gradle things, you just get this impression that a lot of people don't get it. They don't understand what it is. You know, they still have references to writing, oh yeah, you can script your builds. No, that's not what you're doing. You know, they use a language, you use language scripts as convenience to provide a useful modeling tool. But yeah, hoping all these changes will definitely help. Well, I'm glad actually that Gradle Inc. are willing to invest on that side of things as well.
Well, Jen Strader, who I'm sure you know. Oh, and by the way,
yeah.
I think we should say happy birthday to Jen today. I'm pretty sure.
Yes, it is. Happy birthday to Jen.
Yes, I saw that on Twitter also. Jen said that there was always kind of effectively a drinking game as to how late it would be in a Groovy podcast when we mentioned Kotlin, you know. But since you're talking about the changes in Gradle, you know, with 5.0 and 5.1, of course, the Gradle people seem to put a whole lot of hope in the fact that the new Kotlin DSL will attract a lot of new users to Gradle, mostly because they'll be getting better IDE support. What's your sense on that? Do you have any feel for it?
So, I mean, it depends what aspect of it you're talking about. So I can understand the reasoning behind switching to Kotlin DSL, and it definitely does provide a much better IDE support. And there are, I think, a lot of people who just get frustrated with Groovy build scripts because they just don't. The IDE gives them no support. They can't see what structures they can use, what the syntax is for something. And there was actually an interesting comment from somebody who was offering to write a guide on Android migrating to Kotlin DSL from Groovy DSL. And he said, as soon as I started to use Kotlin DSL, I suddenly realized that actually Gradle build scripts are just effectively programming an API, and a well-designed API at that. And it's like, yes, that is at least one of the main things that people should hopefully see. So, you know, I'm definitely all for it if people start viewing it as an API, a rich API for modeling builds. What else can I say? I mean, I think many people who are using Groovy DSL won't switch immediately. I'm personally comfortable with Groovy DSL, and some of the Kotlin restrictions I find a little irritating, just because I'm not used to them, and partly because I'm not used to them, and partly because static languages can be irritating. They provide this extra support, but it's also a bit of a straitjacket. That's intentional. So,
right.
But to be fair, the Kotlin guys have done a remarkable job of removing a lot of ceremony associated with type safety, languages with type safety in them. And so you still get that type safety. But if you compare calling an ANT task from a Groovy DSL build or a Kotlin DSL build, there's no contest really. It's much nicer with Groovy. But that's also an unfair example, because hey, that's using Groovy's ANT builder. You would expect it to be easier. So I think I don't know whether it's necessarily that it will attract lots more users. It will certainly make a large part of the user base happier.
Well, my expectation, I mean, I've only played with it a little bit. I put in at least one build, just to try to get a feel for the new DSL. And I didn't go all that far in it. I still want more examples, more up-to-date examples and everything, but we'll see how it goes. My guess, of course, is that the people who will adopt it will be the Android people, because Android really is switching over pretty whole scale to Kotlin these days. And the people if they're already writing in Kotlin, they're going to want their build to be in Kotlin too. I mean, that certainly makes sense. I don't know whether that's going to expand into the rest of the development community. I guess we'll know next year. I mean, I think one of the things that came out of some of the recent surveys, the Stack Overflow survey and the State of Kotlin survey and everything, is that Gradle seems to have settled in as about 25% maybe roughly of the build population, with Maven being the vast majority of the rest. And they're having trouble breaking out of that percentage. I don't see them jumping up to 30 or 35 or anything like that. And I suspect that they're hoping that the adoption of the Kotlin DSL will trigger another wave of, hey, let's re-examine Gradle. I hope it works.
Yeah, I mean, it should satisfy some of those users who like the auto completion you get from the XML, and you've got the validation as well. But possibly the main thing there is that some people like the restrictive nature of Maven, and not everybody has the kinds of complex builds that really that let Gradle shine. So Maven does a just good enough job. So why migrate? So I'm not sure the Kotlin DSL will necessarily make those kinds of people want to consider migrating. I suspect other things might. Better visibility on what the build cache can do, for example, to help improve your build speeds. And I think eventually that is probably what will persuade more and more Maven users. Your builds will be significantly faster. So.
Yeah, I get the sense the build cache really enough. I don't get the feeling that enough people use that or know about it to take advantage of it. But you're absolutely right. The people who seem to prefer Maven like the restrictions. They sometimes feel Gradle gives them too many choices, too many different ways to do things. I don't feel like that, but maybe I just don't work on the sorts of builds they have. I don't know.
I think it very much depends on what your experience with Gradle has been. And there's no doubt there have been some horrible Gradle builds where people have just written all the build logic in build scripts.
I see.
Rather than taking a structured approach and using Groovy and Java libraries rather than using the Gradle API. And I'm not going to criticize the people that who've created those builds. I mean, maybe some of them deserve criticism, but many don't, because I don't think there's been enough information on how to develop good Gradle builds. That's something, and that's an ongoing process. There's still plenty of weak areas. I would like to improve the stuff on tasks, the basic stuff about tasks. That could be made a lot more approachable and make it easier for people to understand them and learn how to use them and so on and so forth. So
I think that would all be very appreciated. I mean, another book that's starting to show its age is, Gradle in Action. Ben Mushko wrote that before he joined Gradle, and now he's not there anymore. And I'm hoping maybe he'll re-examine that. Although, I'm in the old school. I like having books around. I don't know how many people, younger than age 35 or something really care about that sort of thing anymore. I don't know. But it'd be nice to have an update on that stuff too. So I assume if you're not doing a lot technical these days, you haven't really looked at Micronaut at all. Is that true?
Yeah, I haven't looked at it. I mean, I heard about Micronaut and had a quick look, but I haven't looked into the detail of it. So
I felt I ought to at least mention it because I think they had another minor point release. I think they're up to like 1.0.3 or 4, something like that. And of course, now that they are official, now that they're 1.0, they have the OCI people have turned a lot of their attention back to Grails. You know, Graham and some of the others, Sergio among them, I believe, are now focusing on the big changes that are going to come in Grails 4, which is going to basically replace a lot of the Spring type dependency injection functionality, if I understand it correctly, with the comparable parts that they've written for Micronaut, so that everything's done statically and quickly and very powerfully as well. So hopefully we'll see an alpha, beta, something like that of Grails 4 early in the new year, and maybe that will revitalize that ecosystem as well. I don't know.
okay, well, best of luck to them.
Yeah.
I don't know what. So I always felt there was a role for frameworks like Grails, although to be honest, Spring Boot has proven it's much more competitive in that space.
Yeah, I think Netflix just announced that they had adopted Spring Boot wholesale for their projects, and of course, Pivotal's running with that, and you know, saying there's a lot of publicity. But I mean, the idea, I think we're starting to see enough of a backlash against the idea of microservices that people are saying, you know, maybe the word monolith is not a pejorative. Maybe that's not a bad thing. And to have a framework like Grails that can build something like that may be very useful. So we'll see how that plays out again in the coming year.
I guess I'm not familiar with this backlash, so it's good to know that there has been. There is always a backlash against these things because people don't seem to realize that there are trade-offs with everything.
That whole hype cycle that comes from Gartner, you know, that the inflated expectations and then the trough of disillusionment. I think we're starting, at least among the people I follow who do a lot of architecture work, they're starting to get frustrated with companies adopting microservices and realizing that, hey, if you can't build a decent monolith, you probably can't build a good set of distributed microservices either. You know, and just because you're requiring all this event-driven stuff to happen doesn't mean you couldn't do event-driven monoliths too. You know, it's like there's a lot of confusion and bad code, and when that starts to happen, people start to question, do I have to go to microservices? And again, I'm seeing that mostly in my Twitter feed. It's not among the people I encounter necessarily.
Yeah, but I mean, I would say that Netflix are adopting Spring Boot more for the microservices side of things rather than for sort of simple web apps, but maybe they're doing it.
Yeah, I imagine so, and we can confidently assume that people at Netflix pretty much know what they're doing.
Yeah, you know? that as well. They've been doing microservices for quite a while now.
Yeah, most people don't have their scaling issues either, so you know.
Yeah. I think people miss the side of Grails could always help you get a like websites up and running. And give you a lot of plumbing under the hood that you could hook into.
Well, and just to close the loop on that, as I recall, it was Glenn Smith's original series of blog posts on Grails in 30 days. You know, basically he was building up his entire expertise on Grails by spending an hour a day at lunchtime every day for 30 days that introduced him to the Grails community that eventually wound up making him your co-author on the Grails in Action book, right?
Yeah. I'm trying to remember who was the first one on that project. Whether he asked me or I asked him, or whether Manning just asked us both. I honestly can't remember, but yeah.
Yeah, that I don't know. I only remember the blog post, and then suddenly I heard the two of you were working together. I didn't know how that happened. Interesting. I guess that's another question for him then. See if he remembers it differently than you do.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely. He may actually remember it accurately. That would be good.
Of course, the other big thing we're waiting for in the new year will be Groovy 3, which is making steady progress. It's just a question of when they start releasing betas and getting ready to actually release the project under the Apache aegis.
So I haven't been following that spectacularly can you summarize what's coming in, the significant changes with Groovy 3?
Well, the one that will, the big syntax change is that they support the Java 8 Lambda syntax, lambdas, method references, all that stuff will be native in Groovy now. So the old idea of taking a Java file and renaming it .groovy will work again, you know, because that broke once we went to Java 8 with the Lambda syntax. But they have added many new operators or many new operations. There's an in and a not in operation. There's a Elvis assignment, you know, a question mark equals instead of just a question mark dot operator there. There are, I mean, do you think I'd remember better? I wrote a whole article about it for Java Magazine, but mostly from the release notes. You know, Paul King's been talking about it a lot. And there are links in previous Groovy podcasts to his presentation. So without going into huge detail, partly because I don't remember them all off the top of my head, but also we have lots of links on it. Groovy 3 looks to be a really nice improvement to the API. I mean, that's the formal adoption of the parrot parser and all the performance improvements that will gain as well. That's all coming, and I hope that's sooner rather than later. Again, the thing that holds it back is there aren't that many people who are paid to work on it, and that's another debate going on in the industry right now: is how does an open source project attract enough developers who to do the things that you don't want to do? You know, that everybody works on the fun stuff, but how do you get them to do the things that not everybody wants to do without being paid about it? You know. Yeah. So this is like Confluence going through that now with a license change on Kubernetes, or was it, or Kafka, or I think it was Kubernetes, right? At any rate.
You're asking the wrong person.
Yeah, whatever. This is partly what the benefit I get out of Twitter is to see the issues being debated that affect me indirectly, but I don't have to actually deal with myself at the moment. So we'll see how that goes. Is there anything else that you're interested in talking about, or anything that you'd like to say to everybody that, you know, is a chance to, you know, your first time talking to the community again for a while?
Oh, crikey. Yeah. That's now I'm intimidated. No. Well, I hope I can rejoin the land of the living in the not too distant future, but I've been saying that for quite a while, so you know, I'm just taking every day as it comes. That's a much overused turn of phrase as well, but yeah, that's pretty much how it's going at the moment. So yeah, I mean, I hope everyone is doing well and you know, enjoying what they're doing. Always very important. And yeah, looking forward to seeing what Groovy 3 brings, and you know, Gradle 6 when it comes out, and see what the Micronaut. Be very interested to see what happens with Grails 4 as well. Hopefully I'll be paying attention. But yeah, we'll see. And you know, if I manage to get over my funk, then I might even get back to Lazy Bones and sort of get that to a 1.0.
Please keep in mind that as far as the community is concerned, you are always welcome, and you could do as little or as much as you feel up to doing, and nobody's ever going to criticize you for it or worry about it. Mostly we just love having you around. You've done plenty, you know, and if you are able to do more in the future, great. If not, well, we completely understand, and it's just nice getting a chance to talk to you again. I mean, I of course, it's a big deal for me because it was at I think it was a Spring 1.2 GX conference, the last one of those, where you pulled aside Baruch and me and said, okay, I want you two to do the Groovy podcast from now on. And so in some way, we are part of your legacy as well, if you're willing to accept that.
I don't know if I want that now. That's
right.
It's all good.
It's totally fair. Totally fair. But it's been wonderful getting a chance to talk to you again.
Yeah, it's great chatting
again. Please feel free to keep in touch, and anything whatever you decide to do, if you decide to go bird watching, whatever, I mean, whatever you decide to do, you know, we're right behind you, and we're glad to hear from you.
It was a pleasure, and thank you very much. And yeah, wish you all the best. Oh, and a happy holiday or a Merry Christmas.
Oh, thank you very much, and the same to you. I hope you have a good time with your family, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, take care then.
Okay, take care.
Ciao.